Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the LendIt Fintech Weekly News Show. My name is Peter Renton, Chairman and Co-founder of LendIt Fintech, and joined, as always, by my good friend and colleague, Todd Anderson. How are you doing, Todd?
I'm well, Peter. How are you?
Doing great. And coming from upstairs from where I'm sitting is our wonderful CEO, Bo Bruskern. How are you doing, Bo?
I am finally rested up after a crazy week at ETH Denver.
Yes, we are going to talk about ETH Denver and in a little bit. But first, I want to start off this week talking about an op-ed in Bloomberg. And this was by the former head of the FDIC Innovation Office. And it was such... I mean, to me, I felt like Sultan Meji is the guy who got the job. This was like a 2-year search by the FDIC trying to find an innovation head. I remember talking with some of the people at the FDIC. They were delighted that Sultan came on board, so excited about it, and he's quit after barely a year. And he basically wrote, I think, what do you call it, Bo? A rage.
It's a public rage quit.
Public rage quit. That's what it was. But what I appreciated about it, it wasn't just a bitching session in this op-ed about what's bad. He also put in what he thinks is needed at the FDIC. And basically, some of the things are just crazy, saying like that people didn't want to, people inside the FDIC didn't want to get rid of fax machines or snail mail. They didn't, things that really are just basic
innovations, Peter. Innovations. Like email.
Yes. But yeah, and just the fact that they couldn't retain staff. I mean, there's so many things. It just, to me, it points to a real massive problem we have as an industry in this country. If the regulators are resisting innovation, I mean, what chance do we have to really lead the world in the future of financial innovation? It's an uphill battle.
A really subtle bit in that, and there's some things that just screamed for attention, and the whole article was great in part because it was short and very crisp. There's one little bit where Sultan said, we tried to mimic some of the innovations that we're seeing in other countries like the UK, and yet it would have been nice to actually have conversed with them or to collaborate with them in a much more collaborative way. And I know on the other side of the pond, because we've talked to them, right? The innovators in the regulators in the UK are eager to engage with other governments. Yep. And apparently we're just not reciprocating. And it makes me really deeply concerned. If some portion of what he's claiming is true, which I believe is a large portion, that's real trouble for us.
It was probably the least surprising thing I've read in the last few months, given how little faith I have in the regulatory and legislative bodies. But there was a few things I thought they're interesting. Bo, you pointed out one, which is just a level of arrogance by the regulators inside the U.S. Regulatory bodies that think that they don't need to constantly converse or proactively converse with regulators around the world. Two, that the regulatory framework that is needed for a new wave of innovation in financial services, that they think they can just apply banking laws from the 30s to them. And three, when listening, I recently listened to an episode of Bankless with Congressman, I believe it's Emmert in Minnesota, who said, the first thing that needs to be done is to rewrite those banking laws.
Right.
Because no matter what the SEC, the FDIC, the OCC, the CFPB do, the oversight goes to the legislative body. The House Financial Services Committee, the Senate Banking Committee. Until new laws are written, there's only so much the SEC, FDIC, CFPB that they all can do, because they're applying laws that were written in the 30s to everything that's happening today. So yes, they can write, executive action, and they can do all these different rules and rulemaking, fintech sandboxes. But in reality, there is a cap and a limit to what they can do because of the oversight from Congress. And so it's it's something I've sometimes when I talk about crypto, it gets me nervous in that this is the bigger impediment to crypto than anything else. If the regulatory agencies and the legislative body don't figure out a way to rewrite some of this, then crypto has a ceiling, and that ceiling is self-imposed just by old laws that we don't, or we probably want to be too lazy to fix.
Yeah, well, crypto has a ceiling in this country.
Yeah,
It doesn't have a
that's what I mean.
ceiling. Yeah, and I think that's where. I mean, I'm pretty pessimistic, really. I feel like where given this article, even before this article, I feel like the US is sort of the big, it's the sort of the lazy incumbent that just keeps getting that. We see it again and again and again. It's the blockbuster of financial services, and Netflix and many others are chomping at our heels, and we're not reacting.
The only thing more infuriating than incompetence is unconscious incompetence.
Right. And that's, I think, what we have here. And the trouble is, and we'll move on after this one. My last statement is that the trouble with regulators like this is they run a monopoly that is unchallengeable. I mean, these are people who are not elected, and you get the head of the agency that has to be appointed, but the rank and file, they're not elected people. And it sounds like they don't get fired.
If the laws are rewritten, they have to adhere to those laws.
Sure.
And so that's the way you do it, is you ask your senators, your congressmen, you elect new people in office, because once those are rewritten, that takes away the inertia. And it says, crap, we need to now change the way we operate because we were just told by those that have our oversight, you need to change. And so that's the bigger lesson. But yeah, I mean, some of the stuff he said is a scary thing for the century that we're currently in. And I always say crypto moves like a dog year, 7 years in one.
Right.
By the time this is fixed, we could be in old age.
Right. Okay, let's move on. I want to talk about an acquisition that announced this week. SoFi is acquiring the banking infrastructure firm Technesis. That's how you say it, right, Todd? Is Technesis?
Yes,
yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah. So we know Technesis from our Latin American event. They've come and spoken at our event, and they're actually based in Miami, but they have been focused on the Latin American market. I didn't even know they were they had much presence in the American market, but SoFi is now going to use Technesis to replace their current, because SoFi have just bought a bank that's closed and done, and now they're going to replace the core banking system with Technesis technology, and also sell it on. $1.1 billion acquisition from SoFi.
What I find most interesting is this is the second acquisition they've done in the digital banking sphere, which was Galileo and Technesis, is that now SoFi gets insight into their competitors. Who's using Technesis? Who's using Galileo? Because now they're owned by SoFi. And so they can be like, all right, pricing model for them was this, or this company, this bank uses this. Now we know what technology they're running on. We can adjust and change the way we operate. So I find it fascinating from that angle. Not only one that obviously they'll probably eventually implement some cool innovations and stuff, but the insight they potentially get into other fintechs and banks is pretty fascinating. And if I was a potential competitor of SoFi or a bank that uses, it's a somewhat scary proposition. Like, how much insight does Chase have into Bank of America's technology vendors? And I mean, maybe surface level, but not the level of detail that SoFi now has.
And think about how hard it is to rip out a core banking system. So,
right.
I mean, owning the core banking system as a bank, that's interesting, right? Some real innovation and development can go on there. So clearly they saw a developer pool, a core that was worthy, and probably a LATAM opportunity as we're all three bullish on Latin America generally. It's an interesting investment.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so let's move on to overdrafts, our favorite topic here. We keep highlighting the moves that have been happening in the last like couple of months. Citi, third largest bank in this country by assets, has now said they are going to eliminate all overdraft fees by the summer. And this is the largest bank so far to say they're eliminating all. Other banks have made some moves, and Bank of America have reduced their fees, and Chase are reducing the amount, but they're not completely eliminating. Citi, complete elimination of overdraft fees. Other fees as well are going. Interesting point though. They only this fee revenue only makes up 1% of Citi's overall income. It's much higher at Wells Fargo and Chase and Bank of America, but still, the march goes on.
That's a good PR strategy.
I think the bigger question I have though is, so if you use your card and you swipe it, is it declined?
I think that will be the case. Yes.
Yeah. See but that brings up a different issue, because do you really want to be declining transactions that can overdraft you $5? Like I think the model that TD and Chase have come up with, which is you have a $50 gap. You go over $49, your transaction goes through, there's no fee. Yeah. The money, you put the money back in the account, or PNC, which is a grace period. The declining of the transactions, I think, is while eliminating overdraft fees is good, I don't think the declining the transactions is the option that consumers really want.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of this kind of weird spot, which is, we got rid of overdraft fees, but you'll just get a ton more declines.
Well, I think what you described there, the $50, $100. This is just the first move. I think we're going to settle on an industry standard, I think, of $50 to $100 of free overdraft. You might have to pay like a little bit of interest or a little bit of a monthly fee to have that privilege, but people don't want to have their you're going into Starbucks and you're buying a $3 cup of coffee. You don't want to have that declined when you've got $2.95 in your account.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite the embarrassment. It's and it's just this goes back to part of the reason why I hate people hate talking about money. It's like this anxiety of, all right, I just swiped, and the person behind me is like, all right, this person obviously can't afford this stuff, and it could be $1. That's the difference. And so it's the cascading effects it has on the mentality of people can be pretty damaging.
Yep. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Warren Buffett. This was a really interesting piece news this week. We knew that he'd invested in Nubank. He was did I think in their Series G that what they did before they went public. But what we didn't know is that he's doubled down. And the interesting thing interesting timing, he's sold Visa, he's sold MasterCard, and he's added $1 billion of Nubank stock. So that's he's
trimmed.
He's
really
bullish.
Trimmed his position. Sorry, in Visa, MasterCard.
He what?
Trimmed his position.
Trimmed,
so it's 13% of his position that he sold. So the numbers are interesting in that it's sold a whole bunch of MasterCard and Visa. 3.1 billion and bought $1 billion of Nubank. But Berkshire's position was just trimmed. It wasn't
right. Okay. Thank you for the correction. Yes.
Yeah.
Nubank's where it's at.
Yep. And it's interesting that
where it's at.
Buffett is like a value investor, and he must see value in what is potentially a pretty highly valued stock. He obviously believes in them, which is great. Speaking of highly valued companies, we have Chime that has basically said they're postponing their IPO. They were due to go out next month. Not a good time to go out right now with fintech stocks being hammered since the start of the year. They say, of course, the decision has nothing to do with market conditions. But they're really focusing on launching new products. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. They will go public, I'm sure. This year is it's pretty highly likely. They've got the scale. They're just going to bide their time, is my view.
Yeah, we'll just say that the window's closed for a moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a natural course correction that is probably needed in fintech, and especially with all the companies that had gone public the last 18 months via, most of them via SPAC. There's been some other different types of listings in there, but clearly valuations have taken a hit, and better the private valuations aren't as haven't been hit as much as far as we can tell with fundraisings and all the publicly available data out there, that I don't see how this really hurts them in any way.
No, I don't think. And yet some of the public market valuations, I mean, they're down 70-80% from when they closed the SPAC transaction. It's just quite remarkable.
But you kind of knew it was coming, though. It's like, all right, the SPAC craze went on. Then you're like, all right, how many of these companies should really be public? And now we're finding out that there's a bunch that shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's also a natural correction to what was a very popular transaction for a 6 to 8 month period.
Yep. Okay, so I want to move on, and I'm going to hand the microphone over to Bo because I want to hear about ETH Denver. That was sort of last week. Big crypto event here in Denver, Colorado, which is where Bo and I both live. And Bo spent quite a bit of time at ETH Denver. Give us some of the highlights.
Yeah, so ETH Denver is the annual developers conference for the Ethereum protocol, and it's been the first year back in person for 2 years. So it's been a long time in coming, and it was a great reunion plus for so many more people that have onboarded in the last couple of years. It attracted 15,000 people to Denver. All tickets were free, but you had to apply to get a ticket. The downside on that is that some people stood outside for 2 hours in the cold, because some of those days in Denver were 60 degrees. Some of them were 10 degrees. And so it was really a phenomenal showing for the crypto community generally. A great deal of development was going on. Again, it's a developers conference. Some of the themes were, pretty wonky. Will there be competitive layer one technologies like Near and Harmony? Will they develop well? Or are we going to see Polygon, really taking, as a layer two, sort of taking primacy in this continually evolving landscape? Other questions or other themes were sort of decentralized startups versus centralized startups. You have centralized wallets like MetaMask that are now being challenged by decentralized startups like Tally. How does that play out? And then speaking of decentralization, the advent of DAOs, which have been around for a couple of years, but really came on strong in the past, call it 9 months. And how are they going to sort of change the future of work? There's a lot more that was going on this week. I would say that it was very high energy, very spirited, and very crypto in the best sense of the word. Like it was a lot of collaborative chaos and a very friendly, welcoming community, and not at all sort of the NFT hype craze that you might also associate with crypto. There was very little of that. So it was awesome. It's awesome to be a part of it. And I learned a huge amount, and you'll see some of those learnings coming in our future programming at LendIt.
And, I did manage to, I had breakfast with Ram Alawalia from Pure IQ, or now Cross River Bank, sorry. And he, what he said that was interesting to me, and I think you reflected this as well, Bo, is that there wasn't, there's been a bit of an anti-bank sentiment in the crypto space. I mean, you have the bankless guys, which by their very name, kind of anti-bank. But what he said is that there is a lot more openness towards working with banks than there might have been in the past.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. I did go table to table down the expo hall, and I asked a simple question of many of these exhibitors, and I said, "Look, to what degree would you like to build a bridge to the TradFi, traditional finance, or the fintech segments?" And there were exceptions, but I'd say 80+% of the people I spoke to gave a very enthusiastic yes. We would love to have that discussion.
Right. Interesting.
What about the sorry, I just want to ask Bo one question, which was, the concept of decentralized, which is, very much a core tenet of a lot of crypto enthusiasts, and the centralized banking system, and how those two things play in the same, sphere as one another, and what that might look like in the future, and how much that might discourage some of these people from entering the financial system in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I'll offer my perspective, which might echo some portion of the crypto community, which is centralized systems really do matter, and there's a real benefit to having centralization. Ideally, you get better security and governance and sort of longevity, one would argue, with decentralization. And so they need to find ways to cooperate. And remember, of course, very well that Coinbase, highly centralized, MetaMask, highly centralized. Like a lot of the major crypto companies out there are centralized. And so they feed off of each other. And the decentralized movement is very important, especially when you're talking about protocols. Like if you've got an Ethereum protocol, or any protocol that you're syncing information in the blockchain, it's a very strong argument that decentralization is more secure, and that sort of underpins the spirit of crypto. But I think there's a real recognition that custody is good for the lion's share of our wealth, and that we need to have other ways of holding that wealth and communicating that are not centralized, that are not necessarily custodied.
Okay, so let's move on. I want to talk about now some news out of ClearCo, used to be Clear Bank. Always thought this was such an interesting company, run by two, they were a couple, Michelle Romanow, who we've had speak many times, Andrew D'Souza as well, has spoken at our events. And apparently they're no longer dating, but they are still in business together. Michelle Romanow is now CEO of ClearCo, and Andrew D'Souza has moved to chairman. They're both very actively involved still. ClearCo has become I'd say a pretty major player in fintech, valued at $2 billion. They started off with sort of a revenue-based financing model. Now they're doing all kinds of different things. It's an established company that is a pretty big player, and some changes at the top.
It's tricky.
It is tricky. Well, the article said, the TechCrunch article said, some of the investors actually had were concerned about this was not just a married couple, they were just a dating couple. And
dating makes it actually a little bit less tricky.
They're living together. And it was, but anyway, so.
I mean, it's when building any type of company that you're doing it with someone, romantically involved or not, there needs to be clear and present boundaries as to what and who is has ownership and what stake, and once those start to blur, it gets beyond just, all right, here's a company that I own 25%, and that blurring of the lines is really, really dangerous. for the health and future of a company. And so it's clearly some tricky things to navigate through there.
Yeah. And I think sometimes Bo and I spend more time with each other than we do with our wives and families. Some weeks, we try not to make that a habit, but it is very much a challenge. Anyway, I want to talk about an article that was written by our own Kevin Travers, who wrote this manifesto, he called it, and it really is that way, talking about, really prompted by the JP Morgan opening up a branch in the metaverse. And it really sort of hit home for him. And he basically, he's Gen Z. They're targeting Gen Z, and he's one of the older Gen Zs. He basically said that the whole crux of the article was that they're, Gen Z are digital natives. They live in a metaverse type world anyway. They're always on their phones, interacting with screens, and they actually don't want to increase that with a set of goggles and hang out in the metaverse. So he's not very bullish, shall we say, about JP Morgan's efforts.
Yeah, I mean, he's so right on. Like, this is a multi-threaded rant of Kevin's, and it was super entertaining to read. The key point about JP Morgan opening a branch in the metaverse is just the classic boneheaded move that's invented in some boardroom somewhere by some marketing managers, product developers, what have you, that are just completely clueless about their audience. And it's going nowhere.
Well, certainly, I think you're right on the JP Morgan thing, but the metaverse is something that I think we all need to keep an eye on and what it really means, because I don't think any of us have any idea yet. I was talking to someone the other day at breakfast, and it's like, will breakfast in the future be in the metaverse? And I'm just sitting at my table, he's sitting at his table, but we have the goggles on, and that's how we're having breakfast. I don't know. I hope not, obviously, but but there are all these things that are potentially possible. And then when you rope in financial services with it, then it becomes not only just this fun game, but then it becomes a significantly different venture and a lot more serious in how commerce is done and potentially how events are run, and there's all different possibilities. I think we're just in the infancy of not only the metaverse but crypto and everything, and seeing how all of this kind of begins to shake out, and tying it back to the first point, if we don't have the people in power that allow for these things to develop naturally versus this constant push and pull of what's allowed, what's not allowed, can I do this, can I not do this, it puts us in a really, really tricky spot, and potentially way behind the rest of the world that it's a bit more forward thinking.
Yeah, the way I look at it is, is it a better experience in the metaverse, or is it a more convenient, or is it, right now you've got, like what Kevin has said, like, put some effort into your app. Don't try and create a whole nother experience in the metaverse. But I think that's really the key thing. Anyway, we're almost out of time. Just last thing, I do want to close with the interesting story on CNBC today. We're recording this Thursday afternoon. Russia has invaded Ukraine in the last 24 hours, and that has been obviously dominating the news everywhere. And to talk about sanctions, of course, and a lot of those sanctions are financial. So it's going to be interesting to see the fintech kind of angle here. And one thing I just wanted to highlight with the CNBC story was that Bitcoin donations to Ukrainian military type organizations have been soaring. So Bitcoin, there's been over $1 million apparently donated to various groups, and that's at an exponential increase. They say it's going to be much more money than that. Ukraine, in recent weeks, has embraced crypto, and so there's that's going to play in. So this is going to be an interesting angle about if the banking system is suddenly shut down, what do you do? Crypto.
I think that was sorry, I thought you were done there, Peter. But what I was going to say is the Bankless episode I was listening to, Congressman Emmert one thing he was talking about is like this. There's a constant chatter in Congress and stuff. It's like, what about sanctions if crypto's decentralized? And he's like, well, we'll figure it out. That shouldn't stop you from potentially innovating because one piece of it doesn't line up the way in which it does today. All right, we'll take Russia out of the SWIFT payment system, and now they're cut off from interbank payments from around the world. Well, potentially crypto could ruin that sanction, but maybe it comes up with other sanctions. So I think a lot of this ties together. And so I thought that was an interesting point on top of what you were just talking about.
Last word, Bo?
I'm so tempted to just dive deep into this.
please don't. We're actually over time.
All right, sorry, we got to go.
That's probably a good idea. Let's leave it there.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Keep a reminder, LendIt Fintech USA happening May 25th and 26th in person in New York City. It's going to be huge. Go to lendit.com to buy your ticket if you have not done so already. And with that, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Bo. We'll be back same time next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Bo.
Thank you.